What's going on YouTube? How are we doing? Thanks for tuning into another video. Today we are going to be doing the install for the Action twin disc onto my Integra's block right here. It's still on the engine stand, but we're gonna get that taken off right now and actually show you the step-by-step process on how to install your Action twin disc. Now obviously, like with most clutch installs, if you're not doing it on the car, it's gonna be best to take it off of the engine stand since you only have a little bit of room right there between where it mounts to the engine stand and the actual block. I am not gonna be using this oil pan for my final assembly of the engine. I just have it on place right now. That way I can set the engine block on the floor and have it not sit on the actual oil pickup. So that's what we're gonna be using for mock-up at the moment. Really important, before you actually start the process, it's good to have everything laid out that you're gonna be needing. In my case, I have my crank bolts right here. I just got done cleaning them with some carburetor cleaner. Make sure the threads are nice and clean. Over on this side, we have our clutch alignment tool from Action Clutch themselves. Obviously, it comes with a step-by-step install sheet, which I'm going to be following. Important, make sure you use a clutch pedal stop. You guys know that we need this because on the Integra, first time that the bottom end kind of blew up was because I didn't have a clutch pedal stop. But we have one right now, so definitely remember, keep your clutch pedal stop. And once you get to that point, I'll show you guys how to adjust it once the car's running and whatnot. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. You need to have that, your torque wrench, as well as red Loctite right there. Obviously, your twin disc. As you can see, I have the actual flywheel, pressure plate, the discs, and the whole twin disc assembly. Right here I have an oil seal for the front, which would be for the oil pan, obviously, or the oil pump. Obviously, I'm not using this because I bought a brand new 4-piston oil pump, which came with a brand new seal already installed. But I got it as a package because it came with the rear main seal as well. So now I have an extra seal there. We just made sure that we have some fresh RTV onto the actual rear main seal, and that is fresh to make sure there's not going to be any oil leakage whatsoever. Whenever I'm rebuilding a bottom end or I'm putting a motor together, that's one of the most crucial parts, especially when you're installing a new clutch. If you already have the flywheel off, it's definitely a good idea to at least check it and replace it if need be. Here we have the throwout bearing, and I already did the breakdown when I did the unboxing for the Action clutch, so you guys pretty much know what's in the whole kit. Right here I have just a little 10mm, which I use for the rear main seal. Then I have this 6 Allen key, which is what fits right here for the pressure plate bolts. Now I just got to get the actual socket for the flywheel bolts. But instead of the torque wrench, just to get things nice and snug at first, so we don't have to strain the torque wrench, I have a regular ratchet as well, which we're going to be using. And yeah, without further ado, I am going to be setting this onto the floor. I have a couple pieces of wood, just so I can set underneath the high part of the oil pan. That way the motor stands nice and level. And since I don't have a second person with me right now, I'm going to see if I can hold the actual crank using a breaker bar, probably somewhere against the rail of the garage door. That way I can actually torque it and have the motor stay still. Alright guys, so I know it's kind of an awkward position. I have the block on the floor right now. Like I said, I have the crank bolt wedge with the breaker bar onto the garage door. This is a nice clean surface. Obviously we have the brand new rear main seal on there. The plug is back onto the block. Now the flywheel itself, once we go to put the clutch discs on, we want to make sure that it's a clean surface. So for the portion after we put the flywheel on, we're going to be using gloves. For this part, it doesn't really matter because we're going to be cleaning it afterwards. What I want to do right now is get all of my crank bolts together. That way I can apply a little bit of red Loctite just onto the actual bolt itself, onto the threads. That way it holds the crank bolts more secure and it's not prone to vibrational loosening or anything. So very simple, just a little bit of Loctite on all the bolts. You guys have seen me do this before, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. But very simple, a little bit of Loctite. I'll show you how much I put on. And then we are going to be tightening this first with the ratchet just to have the bolts snugged onto the flywheel in a crisscross pattern. So if I'm doing this one right here, I'll move on to this one, then that one, cross formation, you know, basically to evenly distribute the torque onto the actual flywheel, just like when you're tightening most things. Once we have all the bolts actually snugged on, then we can bring out the torque wrench and do it in 3 torque specs, or 3 torque steps, excuse me, starting with 30 foot-pounds, then 60 foot-pounds, and finishing it off with 90 foot-pounds. So without further ado, I'm just gonna let that rest right there. And I have all 8 of my flywheel bolts. Just gonna do a light amount on each one of these threads, and the Loctite itself will seep around to the other sides of the threads as well. Basically like a nice little glob on each one. All right, there we go. Now this is technically permanent. You guys have seen me do it on other cars, and just because it's the red and it's called permanent doesn't mean it actually won't come off. Normally you just use a torque wrench or a high torque impact to take them off, and they come out just fine. All right, we're lining it up as best as we can, and the flywheel actually does have a groove for the crank, so it can kind of center itself for the most part, and then the rest of the centering will be done with the actual crank bolts. So right now I just want to seat them all in, start them all off by hand. Now typically I like to do this with an impact driver, although they recommend against it for good reason. A lot of people don't know how to control an impact driver, to be honest. Sometimes they just go all the way in. So if you're not confident, I follow their instructions to the T, of course, in that aspect, because we definitely don't want anybody at home trying this and over torquing one side and not evenly distributing the crisscross pattern that you need to do on this. So now that we all have them pretty much onto the flywheel, as close to the actual part that we're actually going to start torquing it, we want to just snug them down by hand. Alright, so now we moved over to the torque wrench. We are going to start at 30 foot-pounds. You want to make sure you have a nice torque wrench. This one's a Craftsman. Never let me down. These are kind of a pain to have the socket stay on, since they are very short 12 points. Just going to go over the sequence one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if you aren't really good with your memory, to be honest, one smart thing that you can do is do one little dot after each sequence with a little Sharpie. So for example, we just got done with our first torque sequence, 1 dot on each bolt. That way you know that the first torque spec is done on that one. And if it's easier for you, you can do it after every single bolt. Now we are going up to 60. So 60 on that one. Pretty sure it was this one. See, I just forgot which one it was. Yep, that one, but I wasn't sure, so another dot right there. This side right here. Another dot right there. Another dot right there. Dot. Dot right there. There. There we go. So we have 2 dots. I did an extra one right there by accident, but I'll wipe it off anyway. 2 dots, 2 dots, 2 dots, 2 dots, 2 dots, 2 dots. We know all around, and it comes off really easy, especially if you just did it with a Sharpie. You can just take it off, and for the final step, I'll just do 1 dot. I typically don't do this because I don't often forget. I usually keep an eye on them, but it's just a little tip. It helps out some people when they're doing torque sequences like that. So now we did 30, 60. The next step would be 90 foot-pounds. All right, guys, nice and simple. On to step 3, 90 foot-pounds. Just gotta calibrate my torque wrench to that setting. And before the comments come in, yes, I am using an adapter from a 3/8 socket onto a 1/2-inch wrench. It's not the right thing to do. Do as I say, don't do as I do. I should have the right socket, but it's fine. We're just gonna send that puppy. So here we go. First one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 crank bolts at 90 foot-pounds. Now, a nice thing to do is go over them one more time, not actually tightening, just at 90 so it can click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we have the flywheel completely torqued, 90 foot-pounds using 3 steps. Pilot bearing obviously is already inside. Now the next portion, we are going to be using our gloves as well as the alignment tool and the other parts of the clutch kit. Before we do that, we are going to clean this surface right here where the actual clutch discs ride. You can use any type of degreaser, typically brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner, as long as you get all the grease and foreign material off of this and dry it. Make sure it's 100% dry and oil free with no contaminants. Then you can actually put the clutch discs on. In my case, I have just a little rag right here with some carburetor cleaner. Just like that, nice and easy. You can see a little bit of contaminants came off on the rag, but just the sight of the flywheel is already so much cleaner. And typically, it's not a huge deal if there's a microscopic amount. You just want to get basically like the fingerprints off and any possible oil that may be on it from the packaging itself. Because when metal parts like this are shipped, sometimes there's a little oil film. That way it doesn't rust while it's shipping or while it's in a warehouse. So that should be good right there. Let me grab the stuff that's in the rest of the clutch kit, and then we can move on to the clutch disc and pressure plate. Alright, so you guys do know from the breakdown that we have these Allen bolts that come along with the clutch kit, as well as their corresponding washers. Now, according to the instructions, we are going to be using a small amount of red Loctite on the threads of this. I'll probably use a little bit less than what I use on the flywheel, maybe just like half of a drop. I typically use blue Loctite on my clutch installs for the pressure plate bolts, but since they specifically asked for red Loctite, that's what we're going to be utilizing. Now, for the torque specification with these Allen head bolts, they say that it's 22 foot-pounds, which is typically what a flywheel or what a pressure plate gets torqued to. Anywhere from like 18 to 30 is what I've seen on a lot of applications. Since I don't have a torque wrench that reads very, very low, the lowest setting on my personal torque wrench is 20 foot-pounds. I'm not going to do multiple steps. Now, if you're at home and you want to have a very precise install in the sense that you don't have a good feeling on your hand to kind of guesstimate where about 10 foot-pounds is, then I definitely recommend borrowing a torque wrench from, for example, AutoZone or Advance, or even doing a little investment on your end to be able to buy a torque wrench that reads lower. In my case, I feel confident that I can hand torque it to about 10 to 15 foot-pounds and then do a final torque of 22 foot-pounds. So, like I said, it goes down to 20, and 22 should be within its limit. We're gonna disassemble this right now. We already went over all these little separators and exactly what they are. I am gonna be brake cleaning these metal parts just to make sure that there isn't any debris or any oil contaminants on it whatsoever. But starting from the closest side to the engine, this one, like I mentioned on the breakdown, says pressure plate side. So that's obviously going to be the one closest to the engine, but this side of it will be facing outwards towards the transmission. Just going to set that tilted for the time being. Then I have the first separator right there. second disc, also pressure plate side, and then the other portion where the friction material actually rides on. Alright, so these separators are already nice and degreased. We're just going to basically put this all backwards onto the pressure plate. Backwards in the sense of the backside first, and then work its way up to the top. Flip that over. I'm going to insert my clutch alignment tool into it, and you got to make sure that it goes into both clutch discs. Now on the bottom side right there, if I have enough lighting, you can see that the splines go in through the front disc as well as the back disc. That's very, very important when it comes to aligning your twin disc clutch. Now that just goes right into the actual center of the pilot bearing. You're going to position the clutch or the pressure plate to line up these holes along with the holes on the flywheel. Before I put any Loctite on, I'm just going to put one bolt up here, as well as one bolt down here, just to hold it into place. It's a lot simpler like that. I find it makes the whole process a lot faster because it's being held on not only by the alignment tool, but it's already in the portion where the bolts need to line up all around the pressure plate. That way when we go to put these four on with the Loctite, it's really quick, and then the last thing to do would be remove the other two bolts. So like I said, I'm just gonna lay these down, a small amount of red Loctite onto each thread. Just a little dab right there. And just little distribution between them. Right there. So like all bolts, you want to start them by hand. Make sure that the first couple threads go on nice and easy. And once you notice that they are threading on perfectly fine, you can go ahead and use the actual socket, or in this case, the Allen key. Little Loctite on those other two bolts. Right there. I'm actually going to snug the rest a little bit more. That way the flywheel can actually seat against the pressure plate. Twenty-two. 22, and like I told you guys earlier, go ahead and go over each bolt, check the torque. Good. Good. Solid. Perfect. Perfect. And last one. Perfect. Only after you finish final torque on the pressure plate, only after you remove the alignment tool. And you see how easy that came out right there? Both clutch discs are perfectly aligned right there. Perfectly in alignment. So you don't have to worry about anything. The splines will go in easy. That means the transmission will slide on perfectly easy, and you won't have any issues whatsoever when installing the actual transmission onto the car. Okay, so now that we do have the engine with the clutch, we are pretty much done for this afternoon. I have to head to work in a few minutes, so I'm getting ready to clean everything up and put the engine back onto the stand. Just got to put the bracket back on. But without further ado, the engine has a clutch now. Huge thank you to Action Clutch. We are super happy to be running your twin disc onto the car right now. I am going to be putting the stickers onto the car in the next couple of weeks, but I'm not exactly sure if I'm doing a different carbon fiber hood since this one's all beat up, or if I want to place it on the windshield. I want to get a really nice spot for it. But this isn't the last video that we're going to be doing in regards to the Action Clutch. A lot of people who don't know about twin discs or are wanting to increase their horsepower and want to have a better clutch don't know that you need to put a clutch pedal stop, which is especially why we touched base on it before. It's very important to have a clutch pedal stop. Essentially what it does, when you have a twin disc, there are instances that you can overextend the clutch pedal, therefore pushing the clutch into the crank and damaging your bearings. So what the clutch pedal stop will do will basically only limit your throw or limit your clutch pedal travel to a certain extent that doesn't damage your crank, bearings, or engine at all, but still allows you to have the full function of the clutch to be able to engage and disengage as needed. I'm going to be doing a whole video on that, as well as a video when we install the transmission onto here using the Action Twin Disc hydraulic clutch throwout bearing, as well as the regular OEM Honda fork. So stay tuned for those videos. If you aren't already subscribed, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you get the videos as soon as they come out. If you have any questions whatsoever, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you want a more direct answer, just hit me up on Instagram and I can do a little bit more of a personalized chat with you. It's at Slowintegra. And that does pretty much sum up the video for today. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.